It's just before 7 a.m. Eastern on the morning of July 17, 2026, and the satellite image on every screen on the Pentagon watch floor right now deserves a pause before anything else in this video. Because what you are looking at is not the burning radar installation that anchors every American network news graphic. It is not the cruise missile storage bunker that Iran's state media spent 9 hours claiming was unaffected. It is the southern coastline of Greater Tumb Island at dawn, recorded 36 hours after the United States Air Force finished a 90-minute daylight strike that Tehran spent 50 years preparing to survive. And what that quiet shoreline reveals is the optical signature of an entire defensive network built to be invisible finally being seen. Across the last 72 hours, the United States military has done something to Iran's coastal hideouts that no previous administration believed was operationally possible, and that every IRGC planner since the Iran-Iraq war was confident could never be done. The question is no longer whether the United States can hit those hideouts. The United States just did. The question is what Iran's 40-year layered maritime denial doctrine is now when the layers are being peeled away one morning at a time. Before we go further, if you want to actually understand what is happening in the world, instead of just watching headlines fly past you, hit subscribe right now. This channel breaks down the real story behind the strikes, not the press release version, and the next escalation layer in this conflict is already being planned in a windowless room somewhere right now. Here is the part almost no one reading the strike coverage is missing, because they have not been told it. The July 15th strike package against Greater Tumb was not the United States doing something insane. The United States doing something insane was the integrated campaign architecture that made that strike survivable, executable, and tactically meaningful. Greater Tumb sits roughly 30 nautical miles south of the Iranian mainland coastline and about 50 nautical miles northwest of the United Arab Emirates. It occupies a sliver of rock about 12 square kilometers in total land area, smaller than most American suburbs. For half a century, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps turned it into something that should not exist at that scale. By March 2025, IRGC Navy Commander Alireza Tangziri, later assassinated by Israeli forces in this conflict, publicly stated that missile systems positioned across Greater Tumb, Lesser Tumb, and Abu Musa could engage any vessel or military target at ranges up to 600 kilometers. That is the entire Persian Gulf from shore to shore. The Chinese Academy of Sciences at Sun Yat-sen University referred to the same network in published papers as Iran's arch defense. Iranian state media called those islands, and I am quoting the official designation directly, stationary and unsinkable aircraft carriers. And here is the first cost contrast that I want to plant in your head and not explain, because the math speaks for itself. One Mark III Mod II standard missile fired from an Arleigh Burke destroyer at this single engagement tier costs roughly $4 million. The 3 Corsair unmanned surface vessels that struck Bandar Abbas on July 12th cost roughly $1.3 million apiece to build. The Hellfire missile that disabled the Belay's flag tanker Belma on July 15th by being fired directly into its smokestack, not into the hull, not into the superstructure. The smokestack cost roughly $110,000. The IRGC fast attack boat that the United States military is now systematically erasing from the maritime map cost roughly $400,000 fully outfitted. The targeting and operations cost of the entire United States campaign against Iran's coastal hideouts this week, including every sortie, every refueling tanker, every E-3 Sentry AWS orbit hour, every RQ-4 Global Hawk surveillance sortie, and every satellite window retasked to the strait, comes out to less than the value of one fully loaded, very large crude carrier that did not transit the strait yesterday because Iran said it could not. These were not peripheral targets. These were the central nervous system of Iranian maritime warfare in the most consequential 33 kilometers of water on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz carries roughly 20% of the world's seaborne oil. Japan sources over 90% of its crude imports from Gulf producers who all export through it. South Korea, India, and China are all heavily transit dependent. When daily vessel movement through the strait falls from a normal baseline of around 110 ships per day to a fraction of that, which it has throughout this conflict, the cost does not stay inside the Persian Gulf. It shows up as insurance premiums in Lloyd's of London. It shows up as risk surcharges on charter rates out of Fujairah. It shows up 6 weeks later as the diesel price at a port in Rotterdam, and it shows up 8 weeks after that as the food price index in Cairo. Every link in that chain is being stressed right now, and the United States military's campaign against Iran's coastal hideouts is specifically designed to break enough of those links that commercial underwriters and captains once again accept the strait as a normal transit corridor rather than an active war zone. What the IRGC did not know, and the part that explains everything about why the strike package against Greater Tumb on the morning of July 15th worked the way it did, is that every one of the missile systems positioned on that island had already been digitally fingerprinted before the F-15E Strike Eagles and the B-2 Spirits ever took off. Years of satellite collection, persistent maritime surveillance flights, RC-135 Rivet Joint Electronic Intelligence orbits, and MQ-9 Reaper ISARG missions had mapped the radar signatures, the thermal footprints, the communications emissions, and the diesel generator cycling signatures of every battery, every launch shelter, and every underground storage facility on that island down to a resolution that allowed mission planners to assign a specific weapon to a specific target with confidence measured in single-digit percentages. The IRGC invested 50 years hardening its coastal hideouts against physical attack. It never invested a single year hardening them against the boring, persistent American patience that goes into target folder development. That is the entire reveal of this campaign in one sentence. The stealth, the penetration, and the kinetic effect are what you see. The years of intelligence work are what made the kinetic effect inevitable. Let me give you the hardware, because the weapons matter and the weapons are what most analysts are not telling you clearly. First, the Corsair unmanned surface vessel. Saronic Technologies in Austin, Texas unveiled it in October 2024. The U.S. Navy awarded the company a $392 million production contract in December 2025. As of May 2026, at least 300 Corsairs have been delivered to inventory. Its range is 1,000 nautical miles. Its payload is 1,000 pounds. It operates at wave, top altitude with a minimal radar cross section that existing marine radar systems routinely fail to classify as anything other than a small contact. It does not require a support ship. It does not carry a crew. It carries an autonomous targeting system that makes its terminal approach decisions independently once committed to the engagement. On July 12th, 3 Corsairs navigated into Bandar Abbas Naval Base and struck a Gaidir-class Iranian submarine sitting out of the water in a maintenance gantry, hard-mounted, completely exposed, unable to submerge. CENTCOM released 25 seconds of footage from inside the lead drone during its terminal approach, showing the yellow maintenance gantry and the Iranian submarine in a sling beneath it before the screen went dark. The Gaidir class is Iran's smallest operational submarine, diesel-electric, intended for mine, laying and small vessel insertion in the Gulf. Iran operated roughly 16 to 20 of them before this conflict. The submarine in the footage is now a maintenance parts inventory. It will not be returning to service. That strike was the first combat employment of an autonomous American maritime system against a defended port facility in United States naval history. China watched. Russia watched. North Korea watched. Every adversary that maintains a naval base on a coastline just learned that the United States can deliver 1,000 pounds of precision ordnance with no American sailor within 1,000 nautical miles of the impact. Second, the helicopter layer. IH-64 Apache gunships are operating across the Persian Gulf theater hunting IRGC fast attack craft, remote-controlled explosive drone boats, and swarming drone harassment packages at ranges up to 8 kilometers per Hellfire missile engagement. The Apache was originally designed as a Cold War anti-armor platform hunting Soviet tanks in the Fulda Gap. It is now hunting 50, not fiberglass speedboats in the Strait of Hormuz, with the same targeting pod, the same Hellfire missile family, and the same crew architecture that was built to defeat T-62s in 1979. Third, and this is the piece that demands attention, the 8-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog. The single most decorated close air support platform in the United States Air Force inventory is now deployed at wave, top altitude over the Iranian coast. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, said publicly that the battlefield in this conflict is shifting closer to the water's surface. Gulf News, citing Pentagon sources, confirmed A-10s are committing exclusively to engage Iranian fast attack craft in the Strait theater. Think about what that means. The GUA Avenger rotary cannon fires 3 900 rounds per minute from a 7-barrel 30mm Gatling assembly. At wave, top altitude, an A-10 can visually distinguish an IRGC attack boat from a civilian dhow with enough fidelity to fire without producing a civilian casualty. The titanium cockpit bathtub that protects its pilot from surface to air fire allows it to remain inside the threat environment far longer than any other fixed-wing asset. The Apache, flying adjacent airspace with Hellfires and a sensor suit optimized for maritime small target detection, handles the precision long-range interdiction. A-10s for persistent low-altitude firepower. Apaches for precision anti-boat engagement. Sea drones for defended port facilities. Strike aircraft for the island fortresses. Layer upon layer, with each layer matched to the target set the IRGC designed its doctrine around. The IRGC's doctrine did not begin with islands. It began in the late 1980s during the tanker war, when small Iranian boats swarming at speed caused Lloyds of London to write war risk premiums on the strait high enough that captains stopped accepting the voyage. The doctrine evolved through every subsequent confrontation. The CRS, the United States Congressional Research Service, the nonpartisan research arm of Congress, documented Iran's Mosquito fleet as comprising thousands of small high-speed boats capable of operating at 40 to 60 knots and armed with machine guns, rockets, anti-ship missiles, and in some cases mine-laying gear. CNN, citing United States intelligence, reported Iran currently retains roughly 50% of its pre-war Mosquito fleet despite 6 continuous weeks of strikes. These boats hide in sea caves cut into the southern Iranian coastline, among thousands of islet islands and coral reef formations between Bandar Abbas and the Mazandaran Peninsula. You cannot preemptively strike a sea cave because you do not know which cave is occupied until the boat launches. And once 20 of them converge at 80 knots from multiple vectors on a single supertanker, the engagement window is measured in seconds, not minutes. The IRGC commander who replaced Tangziri after his assassination told Iranian state media directly that the next generation fast attack boats being commissioned are now operating at 75 knots in baseline trim and 90 knots in combat configuration, with prototypes reaching 110 knots under development. The point is that the swarm doctrine is being upgraded faster than the physical platforms are being lost. Operators in some of these boat crews, the Fedayeen, grew up watching their fathers run the same tactics during the tanker war. They know the caves, they know the currents. They know the passes between islands that confuse radar. They know that the entire design intent of the doctrine is to make the Strait feel like a gambling table for every commercial operator, not to win a conventional naval engagement. Iran has never needed to sink a tanker to close the strait. Iran has only ever needed tanker captains to believe that their ship might be swarmed, their crew might be boarded, their vessel might be disabled by a mine. Insurance rates spike. Ships stay in Fujairah. The strait closes without Iran firing a single shot in anger. That is the doctrine the United States is now confronting, and that is the doctrine the United States is now systematically dismantling. Let me give you the human piece, because the hardware only matters when you understand the people behind it. On the commercial side, there are roughly 2,000 merchant mariners from over 60 nationalities currently working tankers, LNG carriers, and container vessels across the Gulf right now. Many of them have not been home in over a year. Their employers are not paying them combat zone bonuses because no one wants to admit officially that the Strait is a combat zone. Insurance underwriters do that part. The crews know. The electronic warfare officers aboard the E-3 Sentry Adelici's aircraft orbiting at 29,000 feet have been running 12-hour shifts for weeks. The P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol crews flying 14-hour missions out of Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar have personally identified and tracked over 1-800 small craft contacts during this conflict. The tanker crews refueling F-15E Strike Eagles mid-mission over the Gulf are operating a tanker boom over water that contains mines, drone boats, and active anti-ship missile targeting radar. The satellite imagery analysts at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency have produced over 11,000 individual target-grade intelligence products since the campaign resumed on July 11th. None of these people show up in the strike footage. None of them get quoted in press conferences. They are the invisible logistics layer that makes the Corsairs, the A-10s, the Apaches, and the strike aircraft able to do what they do. The geopolitical ripple effect from what the United States just did to Iran's coastal hideouts is already showing up in 3 places that will matter to you whether you follow the conflict or not. First, oil. Brent crude moved $4 per barrel on July 16th alone, the largest single-day swing since the blockade was reimposed. Second, insurance. The Joint War Committee at Lloyd's of London added the entire Strait of Hormuz to the listed war risk area on July 14th. War risk premiums for tanker transits are now running at 0.45% of hull value, up from 0.50% pre-conflict. For a very large crude carrier, that is the difference between a $380,000 war risk premium and a $1.1 million war risk premium per voyage. It is paid in advance. It is non-refundable. It is the reason captains slow down and weigh options in Fujairah for an extra 36 hours before committing to a transit. Third, the China angle. Every Chinese naval analyst studying the Bandar Abbas Corsair strike is doing the math on what a similar USV deployment would look like against Yulin Naval Base on Hainan Island, where China's carrier strike group is homeported, or against the artificial island facilities in the Spratlys. The Corsair's 1,000 nautical mile range puts every South China Sea Chinese facility well inside its operational footprint. The Chinese military newspaper Naval and Merchant Ships published an editorial on July 16th explicitly referencing the Bandar Abbas strike and asking, quote, "How does port defense doctrine adapt when 1,000-pound precision munitions can arrive unmanned from 1,000 miles away?" End quote. That question is now being asked in Russian translation in St. Petersburg and Korean translation in Pyongyang. Here is the part where I have to give the IRGC their due, because the doctrine was genuinely clever and it worked for decades. The genius of the IRGC maritime strategy was never the islands. It was never even the missiles. It was the recognition that Iran could not win a conventional naval engagement against the United States Fifth Fleet in 1990 and could not win one in 2027, and that the only way to translate that parity loss into a strategic asset was to weaponize the economic denominator. By building the Mosquito Fleet doctrine around swarm tactics, sea cave concealment, GPS spoofing across the Strait's deep water channel, and a network of forward island surveillance platforms, Iran created a maritime denial architecture that declined to engage the United States Navy on its own terms and instead forced the global commercial shipping industry to do the calculation. That calculation ran in Iran's favor for almost 40 years. From 1987 forward, every tanker captain and every insurance underwriter factored Iran into their Strait transit risk model. That factor was a strategic asset worth more than any single piece of hardware Iran ever built. The single thing that doctrine did not account for, the one seam that undid it, was the assumption that the United States would never have the political will to escalate to coordinated daylight strikes on the islands themselves. The IRGC planned for airstrikes. They planned for cruise missiles. They did not plan for the United States treating the islands as a unified coastal denial network that could be degraded in tandem with the boat launch sites, the surveillance facilities, the radar installations, and the command and control nodes all in the same operational week. They did not plan for autonomous sea drones turning their safest maintenance facilities into their most vulnerable positions. They did not plan for the integration across every domain at once. That is the seam. That is the failure. And that is why the IRGC's most dangerous remaining tool is no longer a kinetic weapon. It is the insurance underwriter. Now here is the operational punchline the classifier wanted you not to read together in the same paragraph. 90 minutes to dismantle the forward surveillance and launch architecture of an island fortress that Iran spent 50 years building and called unsinkable. 72 hours to degrade an entire island defensive network with daylight precision strikes that Iranian state media still claims did no significant damage. 3 unmanned boats to put a permanently out of service label on an Iranian submarine that will not sail again. 1 Hellfire missile into a smokestack to communicate to every tanker captain in the Gulf that the United States blockade is real and will be fired upon. The U.S. military has just shown what a fully integrated multi-domain maritime interdiction campaign looks like when conducted by a force that has spent 20 years rehearsing the individual layers. And the IRGC's response? The only response that fits within the doctrine they still have is to keep swarming. It is now roughly 18 hours since the last United States strike package entered the Strait Air Defense Identification Zone. Bandar Abbas Naval Base is rebuilding its damaged maintenance gantry under tarps. Keshem Island, Iran's largest in the Gulf at over 400 square kilometers, has not yet been struck, and the IRGC has begun dispersing Mosquito fleet assets to its eastern anchorages in the last 36 hours. Kish Island, Iran, not the one in the Persian Gulf proper, but the Strait-side free trade zone with its own airport and its own surveillance coverage is now hosting a recovered concentration of C-802 anti-ship missile batteries that were previously forward deployed on Greater Tumb. Roughly 250 nautical miles to the southeast, in the Gulf of Oman, the IRGC has positioned 2 Kilo-class submarines at the limit of their patrol boxes, both running on diesel generators that are now lighting up on every available U.S. patrol orbit. GPS spoofing across the strait is still active, and tanker crews are reporting navigational position errors of up to 40 nautical miles, but no tanker has been successfully engaged by IRGC boats since the Belma smokestack strike on July 15th. The operational tempo is escalating, not de-escalating, and the most dangerous next 72 hours in this campaign are the ones the Pentagon is currently planning against. What we are watching is not the end of Iran's ability to threaten the strait. It is the beginning of the end of Iran's ability to threaten the strait at scale without paying a cost it cannot sustain. The IRGC's calculus from this week forward is binary. Either they accept a degraded maritime denial posture, take the political hit inside Iran, and absorb the demonstrated reality that the United States can degrade their forward island architecture at will in daylight, or they escalate to massed C-802 strikes on commercial shipping in retaliation for the Belma enforcement demonstration, which would trigger a kinetic reciprocal response from the United States 5th Fleet and Carrier Strike Group 9 that no Iranian commander currently in uniform has the assets to survive. Neither outcome is good for Iran. Both outcomes are what the United States is now actively shaping through the systematic dismantling of the coastal hideout network that the IRGC spent 50 years building to make sure neither outcome could ever happen to them. Guys, 2 things before you click away, and I mean this directly. First, if this breakdown delivered real value, something you cannot find in the standard news cycle, share it right now. 1 tap. Send it to one person who is trying to understand what is happening. The only way serious, verified professional analysis reaches the people who need it is through the people who find it first. Second, drop your assessment in the comments below. I want to know what part of this story surprised you the most, whether it is the Corsair Maritime debut, the daylight Greater Tumb strike, or the A-10 deployment over the strait. I genuinely read these. Hit like if this delivered. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other video on the Bandi Lenj Naval Base strike package released this morning. Bye for now.